Pivoting to market fundamentals is where things get considerably less rosy, and the center of the storm is unfortunately Alberta. Now, as we heard from Warren, and as we all know, the energy sector is reeling. And while no one should be surprised when an incredibly cyclical market actually acts cyclical, the speed at which all this occurred caught everyone off guard. To date, the biggest casualty has been the office market, which is suffering not only from weakened demand and a wave of sublets, but also from imminent new supply. The most vulnerable markets are, to nobody's surprise, Calgary, and for slightly different reasons, Edmonton. It's going to be a very tough year to be a landlord in Calgary, where approximately 60% of the largest tenants in the market are energy related. But let's keep this in perspective. First of all, we've been down this road before, 6 times in the last 30 years to be precise, with an average decline in oil prices each time of 54%. I think this slide is a perfect illustration of how Calgary has developed its what to do in a crisis playbook. And there are mitigating factors. Capital spending on major oil infrastructure projects that are already underway cannot just be stopped. Yes, the amount of sublet space has swelled substantially, and it will impact the pricing of direct space, but that's also a characteristic that Calgary is familiar with. And most of the initial losses in that process are borne by the tenant and not the landlord. Remember also that the majority of new supply does not come on stream until 2016. Cold comfort perhaps, but it does give us a bit of breathing space. Edmonton is facing primarily a supply issue which will take many years to work through. But this is mainly a function of the inventory being very small to begin with and relatively modest annual demand. And while there does seem to be a tendency to always default to an Armageddon scenario, what we are currently seeing in the oil patch is a slowing of momentum rather than a dead stop. Outside of Alberta, the biggest threat to the office markets is economic contagion and the resulting impact on job growth, demand, and overall confidence. Office fundamentals are further complicated by the ongoing drive towards space compression. Now keep in mind, this is not simply about squeezing the size of cubes, but fundamentally about how the nature of the work environment is evolving. In a CBRE study of 20,000 workers around the world, a clear theme emerged. While in the office, people spend less than 50% of their workday at their desk. Essentially, people spend about half their time working independently, while the other half is spent working with others, either face-to-face, in a meeting, or virtually. CBRE's new downtown office in Los Angeles is a good example. The company downsized from 61,000 square feet to 48,000 square feet. In the old traditional office, there were 191 seats for 191 people. Now, there are 168 seats for 210 people. Density increased by over 30%. Where there used to be 3 distinct places to work, there are now 16. And through aggressive digitization, they went from 1,500 file drawers to 300 file drawers. Employee satisfaction, by the way, is through the roof. The new office buildings are filling up because the math works for the tenants and it allows them to establish these new workplace standards. The challenge to the older buildings is obvious. Whether it is price point, renovation, or innovation, older buildings need to respond to these changes. The Legacy A buildings in Toronto are excellent examples of how spending capital can affect change and competitiveness. The alternative is to become a pure price play option and a slow spiral down in tenant quality, relative rent levels, and increasing vacancies. Now, will every tenant adopt these standards? No, of course not. And many feel that the pendulum may actually swing back. But a comparison of leasing activity from our most recent waves of office development in downtown Toronto is telling. If we look at pre-leasing activity from the last round of development, tenants expanded by 31%, whereas in the current cycle, they are giving up more space than they are taking. And if you factor this trend into weakening demand in general and new supply deliveries, you have a recipe for a sector that, without an expanding economy, will see rising vacancies and downward pressure on rental rates.